PowerPlayChess, brought to you in association with Kagi. I'm going to show you how a Sicilian Kalashnikov can very easily turn into a King's Indian. This is a wonderful attacking game. It was sent in to me by Gerrit Leck, who's from Germany, and he said that he'd been through my Kalashnikov book with a friend and it helped him to play this game. And yeah, he beats a higher rated player using the opening, so it has something to be recommended. Let's just play the opening moves. Here we go. So it's a Sicilian. Knight c6, d4, so an open Sicilian, and e5, attacking the knight. And knight b5 is the most testing for black, and d6. So this is really the start of the Kalashnikov. And there are two main variations. You can play the knight out to c3 or c4. These are the most popular moves. So in this game, Gerrit's opponent, Patrick Zeitz, plays c4. So going for this Marozzi bind. And you could say this is sort of the principled way of playing for white, because you make sure that the d5 square is really clamped. But as we'll see, black has plenty of other things going on. So bishop e6 and knight c3. So now the knight has come to c3, it's time to push it back to a3. This is always the problem for white with this whole variation, that it takes time for this knight to get back into the game. In the meantime, black develops smoothly. And don't forget that while this d5 square is under white's control, that this square can be used by black, particularly as that knight won't be able to be driven away. Yes, we're going to get a Trojan horse in there any moment. Castles and Queen d2. I mean, there are various ways of playing this for white. Knight c2 is one of the other main moves here to cover the d4 square. But very often black is able to break out with b5. But I cover that in the book, and indeed in the Chessable course. That's on sale at the moment, by the way. If you want to learn more about this opening, then I do recommend you take a look at the course. So Queen d2, yeah, it's one of the main moves, very natural move, connecting the rooks, supporting the bishop along this diagonal. But there is a problem, that the d4 square is now available for the knight. And yeah, I think it's absolutely best to throw this knight in. I call this, in the course, I call this the Trojan horse. It's very annoying for white because white certainly doesn't want to give up that beautiful dark squared bishop, because then this bishop on g7 is just a monster. So after this, I mean, this is, I would say, strategically already winning for black. Actually, this is a tremendous position. So white plays f3 to support the e-pawn, and now rook c8 was played. I think that's a good move to put pressure on the pawn here. You could also actually already break with b5. This is really interesting. And then go for d5. So b5 is the classic break against the Marozzi. And then d5, liberation station, as I call it. Once you get in d5 in so many positions in the Kalashnikov, that just liberates black's pieces. That's another way of playing. But rook c8 I like very much. Absolutely typical to put pressure on this c4 pawn. Rook c1 played, yeah, very natural. Knight d7 played by Gerrit. I think it's a good move, but there are lots of ways of playing. Again, I think b5 is a very interesting move here, and with this idea that white takes this pawn, but watch what happens. Black actually wins an exchange in that position. I mean, white does have some compensation, but, well, d5 looks quite nice, just breaking out. And the other way to play, once white plays f3, that means that black can play knight h5, because obviously the bishop can no longer take the knight. And that knight could well hop into f4. So using these two outposts, that's another decent way to play. But I think I just want to show there are a range of options for black in this position. But knight d7 is also a very good option. So the bishop supports the knight, and potentially the knight can swing here, but also the f-pawn is released. Knight e5. And one could play f5 immediately. One could also take on d5. I mean, removing this knight, I think, is a good idea. One could play like this, and here an f5. I think that's a very decent way for black to play. This knight is supported by the pawn. White doesn't really want to give up that lovely dark square bishop, and obviously there's going to be play on the king side because that e-pawn could be a little bit weak. So lots of nice ways to play. Garrett exchanges off that bishop, which often supports these pawns, and then plays f5. So again, I think a very logical way to play. And queen d2. So bringing the queen back on the d file, but also potentially supporting the bishop here. But now Garrett seizes the moment and turns the position basically from a Kalashnikov into a King's Indian. If you're a King's Indian exponent, then you'll recognize this pawn structure. Normally there's a white pawn on d5 rather than a knight, but basically this pawn wedge means that black can try to push forward with g4 and open up the g file and get through to the king. And this is particularly interesting when white no longer has a light squared bishop, which can often protect these squares. In this position, it is extremely dangerous. So Garrett basically plays as you would in a King's Indian. Rook f7, very good move. So this absolutely typical maneuver. The bishop will come back to f8, which supports that d-pawn, and then the rook is able to shuffle across to the g-file to support the advance of the g-pawn. So there we go, rook d1, bishop f8, all as advertised, very nice. Queen b4. Now this is, I think, a fascinating moment in the game where, well, Garrett analysed this and he points out a move that he could have played. Perhaps you'd like to have a look at this position. If you were black, how would you play in this position? So, time for me to have a think. No, time for me to have a drink. Time for you to have a think. Let's get it the right way around. Cheers. I've got my Ampelmann mug. There we go. Here, you'll recognise my Ampelmann. Cheers, folks. So, black to play. Now, Garrett played a5 here, which he admits himself was an oversight. It worked out beautifully, but it wasn't the best move. I'll go into that in a second. He could have played g5, and I find this very instructive. And normally, I don't like to sort of dive down lines that weren't played too deeply, but I just want to show you this because I think it's really instructive and it shows the kind of attacking options that black has. So, okay, what can white do? Well, let's suppose white grabs this pawn. White needs counterplay, otherwise, black just pushes through. g4 anyway. Okay, so let's take another pawn for white. Now, typical King's Indian pawn sacrifice, g3 to open the g file. So let's suppose that gets taken. And bishop takes. Knight c5. Now that is a key move because it basically shuts out white's queen. It's very difficult for white to bring the queen back into play after this. Queen g5. So you can see that you know, black's pieces are massing here. Well, principally the queen and the rook, and this bishop as well. Let me just keep going on. Bishop was attacked. Rook takes f3. So black is breaking through. And notice this pawn is under fire as well. That knight is beautifully placed, looking at these squares. Rook f1. White needs to somehow exchange pieces. And bishop takes knight will get rid of that powerful beast. And now a really simple move. Bishop e7. This looks so slow, but it works perfectly. So first of all, we should note that if rook takes rook, then queen takes rook check. And actually, this is winning for black because the queen is so far out of play. After rook f3, okay, we'll put the king here, and the threat is just to play rook g8 and attack this pawn, and there is no decent defense. It's quite incredible. For example, if rook g3, you might think, oh yeah, maybe that defends. Check. Bishop comes back and you take the rook. Honestly, there is nothing here for white. This queen is just way out of the action, basically. Okay, coming back to this position, this slow move, bishop e7. So let's play knight c2. And now again, simple move, king h8 with the idea rook g8. And there is no good defense to the straightforward attack on the g file. It just shows this queen is in Siberia, this queen is in the danger zone around the king. Now, of course, there were lots of alternatives for white in that variation, but I think that just gives a really good flavour of how things can turn in black's favour. Flavour and favour, there we go. But instead of g5, Garrett played a5, which works out beautifully. But basically white should have taken on b7 here. And it's a bit like those other variations, except black is a move down. So after knight c5, in fact, after this, black's attack just isn't working. White can take here and play knight b5, and white is quicker, basically. But white bottled it. White bottled it and played queen b5. Yeah. Didn't have the guts to take here. And then black is back on track again with g5. So it went knight b6. So white is trying to basically swing play into the middle and distract black, but watch what happens. Rook c6, so that just holds everything together. Knight d7, rook d7. So black is basically just holding that pawn, so white just isn't able to break through, and black is basically quicker here. So the game went knight b1. Yeah, interesting. This knight is still way out of play. It takes time to bring it back into play. g4. This is so fast. b3. Okay, well, this is fiddling while Rome burns. Queen g5. Takes. Queen takes. And rook g7. Yeah, there we go. That's the move that black has been wanting to play ever since he went rook f7 and bishop f8. Finally, the rook comes over to the g file, and again, white's queen is in Siberia. Black's queen is in the thick of it in battle. Queen e2, hitting a rook, and queen takes pawn. Thank you very much indeed. So, well, white's position is collapsing now. Queen g6, and that makes room for the pawns to advance. e3, I mean, this is a joy to play. f3, wow. The pawn storming through, and there's no good defense to f2, winning a piece, and, well then, black just continues with the attack. Beautiful final position with those pawns. The Rolling Stones storming through. There we go. the steamroller, Pawn Steamroller, or the Rolling Stones. Fantastic game. Congratulations to Gerrit. Thank you for sending it in to me. As I said, my Kalashnikov course, in fact, all my chessball courses are on sale for August. So do check them out. Kalashnikov, Anti-Sicilians. If you want more details, then do check out the links I'll have below there. Thanks for watching.